somewhere in the middle of the South Atlantic, there is an island that shouldn't exist. Not because geologists can't explain it, but because nothing about it makes sense to the human mind. No roads lead to it. No planes fly over it. The fog rolls in, so thick some mornings that the island itself seems to disappear. As if the ocean decided overnight that it had shown you enough. If you sent a letter there right now, it would take months to arrive. If you needed to leave in an emergency, you would wait for a ship. And then you would wait some more. There are people living there, right now, as you watch this. Fewer than 300 of them. On a volcanic rock that the rest of the world has collectively agreed to forget. They have a name for their home. Tristan da Cunha. And the strangest part, the part that will stay with you long after this video ends, is that they know exactly how isolated they are. They've always known. And not one of them is lost. Not one of them is stranded. They chose this. Every community has an origin story. Most are built on opportunity, gold, trade routes, fertile land. Tristan da Cunha was built on something far stranger, paranoia. In the early 1800s, the world was watching one man very closely, Napoleon Bonaparte, exiled to St. Helena, another remote Atlantic island, roughly 2,400 kilometers to the north. The British Empire, determined to make sure no rescue mission could use Tristan da Cunha as a staging point, planted a small military garrison on the island in 1816. It was never meant to be permanent. But one soldier, a corporal named William Glass, had a different idea. When the garrison was recalled, he requested to stay. He brought his wife, 2 other settlers, and a belief that this island, this forgotten rock in the middle of nowhere, could be built into something real. That was 1817. From those first few souls, an entire community slowly took root. Ships passing through occasionally dropped off settlers, some by choice, some by circumstance. A few women from St. Helena arrived. Sailors who survived wrecks found themselves stranded and stayed. A handful of Americans settled in during the mid-1800s. Over decades, through births and rare arrivals, the population climbed into the dozens, then past 100. The island operated entirely on communal principles. Land was shared. Resources were divided. There was no mayor for much of its early history, no formal government, just an unspoken agreement that the only way to survive here was together. 7 family surnames came to define the entire population: Glass, Swain, Green, Hagen, Lavarello, Repetto, Rogers. To this day, nearly every person on Tristan da Cunha traces their roots back to one of these founding families. What started as a military afterthought became something no empire planned for. A functioning, breathing, permanent civilization at the edge of the known world. For over a century, Tristan da Cunha remained almost entirely self-sufficient. Islanders grew their own food, fished the surrounding waters, and built everything they needed by hand. The outside world was something that existed in theory, a place ships came from, in a place sailors spoke about, but rarely something the islanders truly interacted with. Then came the 20th century, and with it, connection. A radio station was established. A South African company began regular fishing operations nearby, bringing workers, wages, and contact with modernity. The British government formalized its administration of the island. By the mid-1900s, Tristan da Cunha had schools, medical care, and a small but functioning economy built around the fishing industry. Life was still hard, it was still remote, but it was beginning, slowly, to look like something recognizable to the outside world. The population grew, infrastructure improved. And for the first time in its history, the island started to feel less like an accident of history and more like a deliberate choice. But Tristan da Cunha is, above all else, a volcano, and in 1961, it reminded everyone of that. On October 10th, 1961, the ground beneath the island began to shake. A volcanic eruption was imminent. The only option was to do something that no islander had ever seriously contemplated before: leave. Every single person, all 264 residents at the time, was evacuated. First to the Nightingale Islands nearby, then aboard ships heading toward England. They arrived in Britain carrying almost nothing: a few belongings, a lifetime of habits built for a world that no longer surrounded them. The British government housed them in temporary accommodations. They were tested, examined, interviewed. Experts studied them like a curiosity. Here were people who had never seen a traffic light, never ridden a bus, never stood in a checkout line. And Britain, to its credit, tried. Jobs were offered, housing was provided, children enrolled in schools. The islanders were given every tool to begin a new life in the modern world. They didn't want it. Within 2 years, the volcanic activity had subsided. The island was declared safe. And when given the choice, stay in England with its conveniences, its hospitals, its supermarkets and cinemas, or go back to that rock in the Atlantic, nearly every single one of them went back. It's a moment that defines Tristan da Cunha more than almost any other, because it wasn't obligation. The British government would have let them stay. It was pure, deliberate choice. They looked at modernity, considered it thoroughly, and said no thank you. That decision tells you something profound about what it means to belong to a place, not just to live somewhere, but to be made by it. To be shaped so completely by a landscape that leaving it feels like losing yourself. They came home. And they rebuilt. Today, Tristan da Cunha functions as one of the most unusual communities on the planet. The island has a small hospital, a school, a pub, a cafe, and a single road that loops around part of the settlement. The economy is centered on fishing, particularly the harvesting of crayfish, which is exported and generates the island's primary income. Every adult is expected to contribute. Every person has a role. There is no unemployment in the traditional sense because there is no surplus of labor. There is only the constant need for it. Immigration is tightly controlled by necessity. To move to Tristan da Cunha permanently, you must marry an islander. There is no other path. The island simply cannot absorb an influx of newcomers. Its resources, its housing, its food supply, all of it is calibrated for a specific number of people. The logistics of daily life would seem extraordinary to an outsider. Supplies arrive by ship roughly every few months. If something runs out before the next vessel arrives, it runs out. There is no Amazon delivery. There is no calling the next town over. Medical emergencies are the island's most sobering reality. If someone needs surgery, a serious procedure, anything beyond the capabilities of the small clinic, they must be evacuated by sea. That journey takes days. Every resident understands this, and every resident accepts it. There is a level of self-reliance here that most of the modern world has completely forgotten. For all its resilience, Tristan da Cunha is facing challenges that no amount of community spirit can fully solve. The population is aging. Young people who leave for education, which many must, since higher education is not available on the island, often don't return. The workforce is slowly shrinking, and the tight immigration policy that protects the island's culture also limits its ability to replenish its numbers. The math is delicate. Too few workers and the fishing industry suffers. If the fishing industry suffers, the economy unravels. If the economy unravels, the community, the only thing holding the entire island together, begins to erode. Climate change adds another layer of uncertainty. The surrounding ocean, which has always been the island's greatest barrier and greatest resource, is changing. Fish populations shift. Storm patterns become less predictable. For an island that has no margin for error, any disruption to the natural system it depends on carries serious consequences. And then there is the question of infrastructure. The island's harbor, if it can even be called that, given it has no natural protection, is notoriously difficult. Ships cannot always land. Supplies cannot always arrive on schedule. Improving access to the island would require investment on a scale that is hard to justify for a settlement of under 300 people. The world is aware Tristan da Cunha exists. It just isn't quite sure what to do with it. There is something Tristan da Cunha offers that the modern world, for all its speed and convenience, genuinely cannot replicate. A life where your neighbors are your lifeline. Where the work you do today feeds the person standing next to you tomorrow. Where distance forces you to be present because there is nowhere else to be. It is not an easy life. It has never been an easy life. The people who chose to stay in 1817, the people who chose to return in 1963, the people living there today, they are not living a romantic fantasy. They are living something harder and by many measures, more honest than most of us will ever know. Tristan da Cunha has survived accidents of history, volcanic eruptions, the temptation of the modern world, and 2 centuries of sheer geographic stubbornness. Whether it survives the next 100 years is a question no one can answer yet. But sitting here, watching the world accelerate into noise and disconnection, you have to wonder, maybe the ones who chose to stay on that tiny, unreachable rock in the middle of the ocean understood something the rest of us are still figuring out. Could you live this way?